In the Ma family's residence in Apricot Blossom Alley. The deity in golden armor returned to the courtyard after searching through the entire town. Strangely, however, no one had noticed it as it had walked through the streets and alleys. Ma Xianxia was squatting outside the door, and after seeing the deity return, a hopeful expression spread across his face. "How is it?" the military cultivator from True Martial Mountain asked. The deity looked extremely dignified and mighty in its suit of armor, and Ma Xianxia was unable to hear what it was saying, even though he could only see it move its mouth. He frantically looked at the swordsman, who sighed and informed him. "He said that your grandma committed too many sins when she was alive, and this resulted in her soul and spirit becoming as fragile as her body. Thus, your grandma's soul decayed when she died. This small town is also different from the outside world, and it possesses the innate resistance against ghosts and other beings of the yin element. Because of all these reasons, he was unable to find your grandma's remnant soul." Ma Xianxia's face contorted in fury, and he looked up at the deity and roared, "I don't give a crap what method you use. Hurry up and find my grandma's soul for me." The martial artist's expression changed drastically. He was afraid that Ma Xianxia would offend the true god, who had the surname Yin, and he was just about to speak out to stop the young boy, for some unknown reason. However, the deity in golden armor surprisingly opened its mouth and spoke using the official dialect of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, saying, "It's not that I don't want to. It's simply that I'm unable to." After saying this, the magnificent deity, who was shrouded in a golden glow, turned to look at the swordsman from True Martial Mountain. The swordsman took a deep breath before feigning an act of offering incense and bowing 3 times to the deity. Each time he bowed, a wisp of faint golden aura that was as thick as a thread would hover out from his mud-pellet acupoint, then be breathed in by the deity in golden armor. After completing this ritual, the deity leapt up and transformed into a dazzling column of light that shot into the distance. The swordsman's face was deadly pale, and he immediately pulled over a chair and sat down, slowly exhaling a breath. This was the real reason behind the common saying, "Inviting a god is easy, but farewelling a god is hard." Ma Xianxia wore a cold expression as he retracted his gaze. He turned around and walked inside the house, sitting down next to the ice-cold corpse of his grandma. He reached over and grabbed her dry and shriveled hand, and he stared intently at her face, remaining silent for a long time. The swordsman removed the tiger talisman from his waist, and it was clear that its luster had become slightly dimmer compared to before. He slowly placed the talisman in his sleeve. After resting for a brief moment, the man stood back up. However, he didn't walk to Ma Xianxia, and he instead walked over to sit on the doorstep, with his back facing the young boy. He slowly explained, "Your grandma was most likely standing at the door when she was slapped by someone. The force of the slap was immense, and this caused her to fly into the house and crash to the ground, resulting in her death. You might not want to hear what I'm about to say, but you at least deserve to know the truth. The assailant was most likely a cultivator, and they definitely didn't control their power properly. Moreover, your grandma was already feeble to begin with, so the combination of these factors caused her to pass away. Since the assailant was a cultivator, the prime suspect is Chen Ping'an and the young girl from outside. Well, the young girl whose cultivation you disturbed on the covered bridge. Perhaps she attacked your grandma as an act of revenge. The probability of the assailant being Chen Ping'an and the young girl from outside is extremely small, while the probability of it being the young girl from the covered bridge is extremely big. You decided to go to the unmarked burial ground to kill Chen Ping'an, and you did this with the intention of being dutiful toward your grandma. You wanted to sever her negative karma with Chen Ping'an. However, you definitely couldn't have imagined that your trip to the burial ground would coincide with someone charging to your house to seek revenge." Ma Xianxia shakily reached over, and he gently stroked his grandma's cheek with the back of his hand. Her cheek was severely swollen, and it had already become black and blue in color. "So I was the one who caused my grandma to die. Is that what you're saying?" Ma Xianxia asked softly. The swordsman replied, "According to the views of society, yes and no. According to the views of Macaque Xuan immediately cut him off. Unwilling to listen to his reasonings any longer, he stood up with a baleful expression, and he spat. I'm not allowed to destroy nations and massacre cities. And I'm not allowed to wantonly kill innocent people either. I'm not allowed to do this. And I'm not allowed to do that. So tell me, am I allowed to seek revenge and kill my enemy? Before the man could even reply, Macaque Xuan continued, if I'm not allowed to do even this, then what's the fucking point of becoming a militarian cultivator? Why don't I act as I please and become a wanton demon instead? Why didn't I accept the Taoist nun's offer at that time and join her whatever says? The man hesitated for a moment before replying. You can go as long as you're able to endure the consequences. Just like today. Also, there are some things that I perhaps didn't explain clearly before. For example, killing people. In fact, there's a different limit for different people. With the number of people you're able to kill definitely different from the number of people I'm able to kill. This is not only because I'm stronger than you and possess a higher cultivation base. One's temperament and mindset are also extremely important. Perhaps I'll kill 100 people, and all of them will be detestable people who deserve death. Meanwhile, you might only kill 2 or 3 people, but there's already someone among them who's innocent and doesn't deserve death. Macaque Xuan suddenly chuckled and sneered. Why would I ever ask you about whether I can kill someone or how I should kill someone? Do you think I'll ever need your help? I almost forgot. I'm still not an official disciple of true martial manton yet. He glanced down at his grandma before turning around to face the square table in the main hall. Hurry up and lead the way. He bellowed in fury. A black cat immediately shot out from under the table, and Macaque Xuan sprinted after it and left the house. The man didn't pay any heed to this. One had to realize that the nation he originally came from had descended into chaos 150 years ago. Mountains had crumbled and rivers had been severed, and the 100 years of chaotic battle had resulted in tragedies and miseries that were unsurpassed in the entire Eastern Treasured Vile continent. When a new dynasty finally brought an end to the chaos, only fewer than 800,000 of the initial 10 million households remained. This caused many young children to develop the misconception that the corpses of dead people didn't need to be collected and buried. The swordsman was one of these children. He slowly stood up. Compared to telling Macaque Xuan that the assailant had already been kicked out of the small town, he was more interested in visiting Master Ruin and asking him a question. He wanted to ask why the circulation of comic faith was so obvious in this place. Even though Buddhism had already been in a relatively weak state in Eastern Treasured Vile continent for 1,000 years. Not only that, but the Buddhists were also the weakest force in this small town. The militarian swordsman followed Macaque Xuan from a great distance. Even if Macaque Xuan were an official disciple of true martial manton at this moment, the swordsman still wouldn't interfere too much with his personal affairs and grudges. On the battlefield, people could stick by each other through thick and thin. When it came to cultivation, however, each person would have to take responsibility for their own life and death. Of course, nothing was absolute. For example, the swordsman had stepped forward to save Macaque Xuan when he had almost been killed by Chen Ping'an. There had been 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the swordsman hoped that a prodigy like Macaque Xuan wouldn't die too early. He wanted Macaque Xuan to temper both his talent and temperament in true martial manton, such that he could reach a greater height. At the same time, he also wanted Macaque Xuan to become one of the representatives of militarianism, such that he could display his power and brilliance in the coming age of turbulence. Secondly, Mr. J had personally said that Macaque Xuan and Chen Ping'an should only go as far as to determine a victor between them. They shouldn't go as far as to kill each other. At that time, the swordsman had thought that Mr. J was worried about Chen Ping'an being killed. Only afterward did he realize that this wasn't the case at all. Keeping a large distance between himself and Macaque Xuan, the swordsman noticed that the young boy's pace was gradually slowing down and becoming more relaxed after his initial burst of hot-headedness. In the end, he looked like an ordinary young boy strolling through the streets. However, this changed when the black cat jumped down from some rooftop and onto his shoulder, before turning around and sprinting away. It was as if the black cat were telling Macaque Xuan that he had already found the target. Macaque Xuan started to jog slowly, and his aura changed once again. The spring rain was light, and it simply hastened the footsteps of those on the streets. However, it was still far from compelling them to hide under the eaves. A young man and a young woman in extravagant clothes were currently walking toward the main street from Dragon Riding Alley. Their faces were filled with joy, and it was as if they had both obtained some fated opportunity. However, a youth was soon about to teach them the meaning of disaster and fortune always coming hand in hand. Ma Kexuan broke into a sprint 50 paces away from the two people, and when he was 20 paces away, he suddenly called out to catch their attention. When the man turned around, Ma Kexuan ruthlessly threw a punch, not holding back in the least. This was a punch aimed at his head. The young man was sent flying backward onto the street, and he slammed into the ground with a heavy thud. His body convulsed slightly, and he showed no signs of getting back up. Ma Kexuan landed on both feet after throwing this punch, and he was coincidentally standing right next to the young woman. With a twist of his body, he immediately threw a swinging arm at the woman's neck with his left arm. With a bang, the young cultivator, who was half a head taller than him, was sent crashing into the ground. The woman's head smashed into the muddy ground. Ma Kexuan raised a foot and stomped on the woman's forehead. He bent over and looked down, gazing at her dazed face as she said using the official dialect, "I know the assailant isn't a small town anymore. However, this doesn't matter. I can investigate things myself." The beautiful young woman's eyes were bloodshot, and trails of blood were also seeping out from her nose and ears. There was shock and terror on her face as she looked up at the severely tanned young boy. Ma Kexuan's face was filled with wickedness as he continued, "I, Ma Kexuan, ruined your mental state during your cultivation, so you naturally have the right to seek revenge in the future. Even if you hack me to death, I'll accept my fate, and I won't blame you at all. In fact, even if you fail to kill me, I might still forgive you if I'm in a good mood, and I'll be willing to play around with you a few more times. In my eyes, this is how carefree the world should be." The young woman was presumably a prodigy in her sect, so when had she ever encountered a situation like this before? She sobbed in fright, and it was very likely that she wouldn't even be able to remember Ma Kexuan's words. She simply begged, "Let me go, please. I beg you, let me go. Your grandma wasn't killed by me, and I wasn't aware of this matter at all. Ma Kexuan put more weight on his foot, causing the young woman's head to slowly sink into the muddy ground. "Do you know what I detest most about you people? It's that you people can still remain so dismissive after committing a sin. You people don't feel a shred of guilt or remorse at all. Not a single shred. There was a sobbing tone in his voice, and there was more so an intense look of hatred in his eyes. The young woman reached over with great difficulty, grabbing Ma Kexuan's ankle as she begged, "Please let me go. My grandpa is the commander of Sea-Tide Cavalry, and I'm his most adored granddaughter. I can compensate you. I can give you whatever you want. Once there was a look of pity and imploration in her eyes. Ma Kexuan wore a fake smile as he mused, "Oh, what a coincidence. I'm the grandson of Malenti Wang, my grandma." He suddenly raised his foot a little before placing it back down and rubbing it on the young woman's delicate and beautiful face. "Sea-Tide Cavalry. Was it? Just you wait. I'll definitely play around with you in the future." Ma Kexuan removed his foot and looked to his left and right. On the left was the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, and he was standing there with his sword strapped to his back. On his right was an elegant young man, and he held an oil paper umbrella in his hand as he stood beside the collapsed and pitiful man and looked at Ma Kexuan. Ma Kexuan's instinct told him that the young man with the umbrella was actually waiting for him to kill the young woman. Ma Kexuan suddenly squatted down. The young woman attempted to escape, yet her neck was instantly held down by the soaked young boy. Only after she stopped moving did he let go of her. He lightly slapped her face again and again as he smiled and said, "Remember this, okay? My name is Ma Kexuan, and I'll definitely look for you again in the future. And also that person who isn't in the small town anymore. You definitely have to thank him well. Otherwise, the relationship between us wouldn't have been so great." In the end, Ma Kexuan spat on the young woman's face, He stood up and walked to the swordsman from True Martial Mountain, asking in a low voice, "Who's that person?" "The future mountain master of Lakeview Academy, one of the 72 academies of Confucianism," the swordsman replied calmly. "He's called Kuiming Huang, and his ancestry is especially prominent. He's also come here to retrieve a subjugation treasure, and he's an extremely shrewd and calculating person. You need to be wary of him in the future. If I'm not wrong, he's already got an eye on you." Ma Kaxuan frowned and observed, "The feeling that he gives off is very different from the feeling that Mr. J gives off." The swordsman couldn't help but chuckle. How many scholars do you think can be like Mr. J and adhere to their true selves? He hesitated for a moment before explaining. Everyone in the outside world is spreading the rumor that Mr. K's cultivation base has declined and that his mental state has collapsed after his master's reputation was damaged. Thus, he agreed to be banished to this small world, even though he had to endure the constant erosion from the might of heaven and earth. He can still act wantonly and as he pleases, in my view. However, this isn't necessarily the case. Ma Kaxuan wasn't interested in these matters, and he turned around to look at the elegant young man, still holding the oil paper umbrella. He was squatting down next to the young girl, and he was most likely speaking gentle words to comfort her. Ma Kaxuan retracted his gaze and walked side by side with the swordsman. His footsteps were heavy as he returned to Apricot Blossom Alley. "Your wounds are fairly significant, so be careful not to leave any hidden problems. Otherwise, your future cultivation will also be affected," the swordsman warned, as Ma Kaxuan wiped the rainwater from his face. He suddenly asked, "What's our small town like in the eyes of those outsiders?" "It's like the creek outside the small town that's filled with all kinds of small fish and large fish," the swordsman replied. "There's knee-deep water, yet there are also deep and bottomless pools. When coming here to train and search for treasures, have any of the outsiders drowned before?" Ma Kaxuan asked. The swordsman smiled and shook his head, replying, "In the past, almost never. Most of them will peacefully obtain treasures, leaving everyone satisfied and happy. However, this time is an exception. In the young family's medicine shop, a young girl with a gallant disposition walked briskly inside. As she carried a young boy on her back, she looked at a middle-aged shop assistant and asked, "Is Mr. Young here?" Sensing the young girl's extraordinary aura, the shop assistant didn't dare to offend her, and he said with a nod, "Yes. He just finished sorting some medicine in the backyard. You two are looking for him. We're acquainted with Old Man Young, and we want to obtain some medicine from him," Ning Yao replied solemnly. The shop assistant hesitated for a moment before deciding to lead them to the building in the backyard. An old man was lightly tapping the table with his smoking pipe, and there also stood a disheveled man in a distant corner of the room. This disheveled man was none other than Zhang Dafeng, the gatekeeper for the eastern gate of the small town. Perhaps this was a case of everyone having their vanquisher, with Zhang Dafeng not even daring to breathe heavily in the presence of Old Man Young. He no longer appeared like a punchable scoundrel. Old Man Young waved his smoking pipe, and Zhang Dafeng hurriedly walked out of the building, bringing the other shop assistants with him. Old Man Young looked at the familiar figure on Ning Yao's back. Chen Ping and his lips were white, and his entire body was trembling. His arms were tightly wrapped around Ning Yao's neck, as if his life depended on it. Old Man Yao calmly stood up, with one hand behind his back and one hand holding his smoking pipe as he walked up to Ning Yao. He looked Chen Ping in the eyes and said in a hoarse voice, "How many times have I told you? The cheaper your life and the lesser your fortune, the more you have to cherish your life and cherish your fortune. So what do? Every time you encounter a minor setback, you push yourself until you're on the brink of death. Since you like doing this so much, why didn't you follow after your mother at that time? Wouldn't that save you the trouble?" Old Man Young was correct. When he was alive, he always liked to say that a person's fate could be seen when they were only 3 years old, and you were one who wouldn't live for long. That being the case, teaching you the best skills and most profound arts would naturally be a waste. You'll still be 6 feet under very soon. After all, Ning Yao was wide-eyed with shock in her imagination. Old man Yang should have been a kindly and benevolent old man who always wore an amiable smile. He knew that he would be such a bitter and vitriolic old man. It hurts a lot. The old man sneered. Chen Ping'an nodded softly. He was already unable to speak. When he had woken up on Nin Yao's back, he had already started to feel some pain, most likely because the effects of the medicine had already worn off. However, Chen Ping'an had felt like he could still endure it for a little while. When they reached the covered bridge, he knew that he wouldn't be able to endure his wounds for much longer. Thus, Nin Yao hadn't even had the time to retrieve her saber by the creek, and she had immediately carried him and rushed over to the young family's medicine shop. The old man chuckled and said, "It hurts. Then obediently endure it." He then glanced at Nin Yao and snapped, "Let him sit on the bench by himself." Being carried by a young girl. Single quotes. Do you find this embarrassing? The old man mumbled. Nin Yao forcefully suppressed her anger as she carefully placed Chen Ping'an down on the long bench. However, Chen Ping'an immediately swayed and looked like collapsing when she let go of him. Nin Yao was just about to reach over and help him. However, even though Chen Ping'an couldn't speak, he still gestured with his eyes that he didn't need her help. The old man took a puff from a smoking pipe before observing Chen Ping'an's body and aura. He clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "You genuinely live up to your name as an impoverished young boy. But yes, you did indeed manage to keep your conscience clear." The old man was completely indifferent to Chen Ping'an's bone-piercing pain, and he scolded. "What kind of fortunate fate does Liu Xianxia have? And what kind of destitute fate do you have after so many years? Are you still not aware of this? Him dying once is almost enough misfortune for you to die 10 times over. Do you understand?" Nin Yao was truly unable to endure the old man's cruel words, and she asked solemnly, "Mr. Yang, can you please give Chen Ping'an some painkillers first?" The hunched old man shot a sideways glance at Nin Yao. "He's your man?" he asked calmly. Nin Yao replied with an angry glare. The old man ignored her, and he turned around to look at Chen Ping'an. As if in his own world, he fell into deep thought. In the end, he pursed his lips and sighed. He used his old smoking pipe to tap Chen Ping'an once on the shoulders, and twice each on his arms and legs. Suddenly, Chen Ping'an shifted to a position where he lay on his side, with his elbow under his head as he rested on the bench. "Sleep," the old man commanded. Chen Ping'an instantly shut his eyes and fell asleep, with his snores as loud as rumbling thunder. Under the archway in front of the Kill Supervision office, Chen Dui talked about all kinds of strange and interesting things, and the little girl from Sun-Scorched Mountain listened to her stories with relish. She clicked her tongue in wonder and praised, "Big sister, you know so much." Chen Dui smiled faintly and replied, "You'll also know a lot when you grow up." Song Jigson was half serious as he mused. "Chen Dui, you also seem like a fairly normal person when we interact normally like this." Chen Dui raised a brow and asked, "So you're saying that I should act submissively and grovel before the great Li Empire's monarch?" Song Changjing. Song Jigson roared with laughter. He pointed at Chen Dui and said, "If Mr. Dao Che, the teacher in our small town's private school, heard this, he would definitely furrow his brows. Do you know, you're treating things as if they're either black or white. This is very unreasonable. It might sound reasonable at the start, but it's actually extremely fragile against scrutiny. What I'm trying to say is, you naturally don't need to act obsequiously before Song Changjing, nor should you do so." However, Song Changjing is still the most powerful person in the Great Li Empire. Not only that, but he's even a paramount martial arts grandmother. As an outsider, you should conform to our local customs and also show a little more respect to your hosts. Is this not right? Why do you insist on wearing a cold expression and acting like the owner of the place? So be it if you want to act like that. However, you still dare to talk bad to Song Changjing after being beaten half dead by him. I truly don't know what to say to you anymore. In the end, Song Jigson pointed at himself and said with a self-deprecating chuckle, "Even someone who's as foul-mouthed and mean-hearted as me understands the need to take stock of the situation and act appropriately." Chen Dui hesitated for a moment before replying. It was a case of light charges repelling each other. I'm also a martial artist. And to be completely honest with you, I've always looked down on fellow martial artists from Eastern Treasure Vile Continent. Of course, I was eventually proven incorrect, though very incorrect. Xianxia was slightly astonished, and he said, "You're a fairly realistic person. If a martial artist doesn't acknowledge someone's strength, then what else can he acknowledge?" Chen Dui replied indifferently. Xianxia suddenly posed an incisive question, asking, "It feels like you outsiders who have come to our small town to search for treasures and fated opportunities have a fairly different view than us regarding principles and reasoning. That isn't because you're more powerful than us." Chen Dui shook her head and replied with a smile, "There's no need for me to explain anything. Once you leave the small town in the future, you'll also become just like us very quickly. When you enter the path of cultivation someday, you'll naturally understand what I mean. Otherwise, you won't understand even if I talk until my mouth is parched." Xianxia sighed with emotion, "Becoming just like you people. How uninteresting. Double quotes. Daozi suddenly interjected at this moment, suggesting, "Then come to Sunscorched Mountain to play. It's super interesting." Xianxia patted her small head and casually replied, "Sure thing." Chen Dui turned around, instinctively feeling a little tense and anxious. Dressed in a white robe and wearing a jade belt, Xianxia was standing near the archway. He turned to Xianxia and said, "Go back to Clay Valley and pack your things. We're going to leave soon." Xianxia smiled and replied, "Got it. That it's almost time to uproot and leave home." Daozi was reluctant to say goodbye, and she asked, "Uproot and leave home? Does that mean bringing a tree with you and leaving home?" Xianxia roared with laughter, and he stood up and said, "Let's go. I'll bring you home first. This is called being responsible from beginning to end." Xianxia held the little girl's hand and walked with her toward the gate of the office. He turned around and asked, "There won't be assassins outside the gate on Fortune Street, right?" Xianxia chuckled and replied, "You'll need to ask your neighbor and friend." Xianxia pursed his lips. He glanced up at the sky, and what entered his gaze was a layer of thick and dark clouds. It looked like it was about to rain. His mood immediately took a nosedive. After taking Daozi home, Xianxia was surprised to discover Xianxia standing under the old locust tree. He briskly walked over and asked in curiosity, "You're in such a hurry to leave?" Xianxia nodded and replied, "I received some news just now. There's a matter that I need to personally attend to. So we're going to directly take a horse-drawn carriage to Clay Valley. We'll leave after you finish packing your things." Xianxia looked over, and sure enough, there were 3 horse-drawn carriages outside the gate of the Kill Supervision office. This was very likely the first time that he would take a horse-drawn carriage. Xianxia bent down and entered the carriage in the front. Xianxia followed after him, and he sat down cross-legged. Xianxia looked around, only to find that the carriage was completely empty. There was only a straw futon for him to sit on. This was completely different from the extravagance that he had imagined, and the more so wasn't something that would make one exclaim in delight and astonishment. Xianxia was slightly disappointed. Initially, he had been extremely eager to see Sigui's expression of astonishment when she entered the carriage. There was a crisp sound of clopping hoofs as the horses trotted over the bluestone slabs on the street. The 3 carriages left Fortune Street one after another. Xianxia raised the curtain to look out at the small town. From today onward, the Great Li Empire was going to comprehensively lose its nominal control over this small world. Thinking back, however, it was thanks to the huge benefits provided by this small world that the Great Li Empire had been able to grow from a small empire in some corner of Eastern Treasure Vile Continent into the largest mortal empire in the continent. Not one of the largest, but the largest. This was a small world with 1,000 kilometers of mountains and rivers. In the future, information about this small world could perhaps only be found in the secret imperial history books of the Great Li Empire. Xianxia pushed these thoughts out of his mind and casually asked, "You're not going to say goodbye to Chen Bingyan?" The roads became uneven after leaving Fortune Street, and Xianxia's body started to lightly bounce up and down along with the movements of the carriage. He shook his head and replied, "It's hard to say if he can even live." If I'm greeted by a corpse after waiting for a long time, just how revolting will that be? Even his good friend has died. So at that time, wouldn't it be left to me, his neighbor, to help him arrange a funeral? Song Changjing replied with a nod. The little girl from Sun-Scorched Mountain mentioned a person called Macaque Xian. Song Jixing continued. He's from Apricot Blossom Alley, and he's around the same age as me. I heard that he sold Chen Ping'an and that young girl's hiding location to Sun-Scorched Mountain for the price of 1 patch of offering coins. Do you know his background? I heard that he was a mentally challenged retard, and I never thought that he had concealed himself so well. Song Changjing thought about this for a moment before explaining. Some clues have already been discovered regarding the assassin, who was hiding in the Song clan before. The one who attempted to assassinate the prince from Great Xuan Nation in Dragon Riding Alley. Among these clues, there was something about the young boy Macaque Xian. In the past few years, the assassin who used to be a prisoner interacted with Macaque Xian in secret many times. Thought it's possible that they were master and disciple. However, True Martial Mountain has suddenly stuck its nose into this matter. So we have no option but to put it aside for the moment. After all, there are many disciples of True Martial Mountain in the Great Li Empire's army. Moreover, some of them are fairly high-ranking officials as well. Song Jixin smiled and mused. Uncle, there are also times when you have to say have no option. Song Changjing didn't pay any heed to this, and he said, who told me to be in such an important and inflexible position? This dogshit Great Li monarch. When the carriages approached Clay Vase Alley, Song Jixin asked, is Chen Ping'an really just Chen Ping'an? Song Changjing couldn't help but laugh. Before having you moved to Clay Vase Alley, the Kill Supervision Office already conducted a thorough check of his background, numerous generations of his ancestors. To be precise, his lineage is clear, and there's nothing remarkable or problematic about it at all. His lineage also has no relationship with the notions of wealth, nobility, power, and influence. What? Did that Chen Dui frighten you just then? Rest assured, I've already got a fairly solid guess regarding her background. The Chen clan branch that she comes from has no relationship with the Chen clan branch that Chen Ping'an comes from. So, you don't need to worry at all. Chen Ping'an is simply just Chen Ping'an. The only person who can somehow be regarded as his distant relative is Chen Songfang, as well as Dragon Tail County's Chen clan. However, just think about it. They haven't had any contact for several hundred years. So can they still be regarded as relatives? Not only that, but the Chen clan in the small town has already fallen to such a miserable state that only a single member isn't a servant or a maid. In times of prosperity, friends will be plenty, while in times of adversity, not one amongst 20. You've read a few books, after all. So how can you not understand this concept? Song Jixin was unwilling to relent, and he asked, then what about the ancestors of his ancestors? Was there not a single powerful and influential person? Not even a single one. Song Changjing chuckled and said, oh, so you hope that Chen Ping'an's ancestry is more unique and remarkable? Song Jixin didn't hide his thoughts, and he nodded and replied, I'll feel a little better if he's different from ordinary people. Song Changjing became increasingly curious, and he teased, how did he bully you? How did he cause you to have such an obsession with him? But according to my understanding of that young boy, he doesn't seem like a double quotes. Song Jixin chuckled coldly and cut him off, interjecting, perhaps people in small areas don't have the broadest of mind or farthest of sight. However, we definitely can't dismiss them as fools. Those who are kind will be sincere and generous, while those who are sinister will be scheming and deplorable. There are also those who will be unfathomably stupid, and perhaps even sinister at the same time that they're stupid. Song Changjing was even more puzzled, and he asked, then which type of person is Chen Ping'an? Song Jixin sighed, with vexation in his voice, as he lamented, he can't be regarded as any type. He's a genuine idiot. That's why I feel so distressed. Nin Yao squatted in front of the bench and carefully observed Chen Ping'an's sleeping face. Her mind was filled with astonishment. This mystical ability was truly mysterious and unfathomable. Chen Ping'an was sleeping in a strange position. and this caused his entire body to radiate with a sense of natural simplicity. Even though Ning Yao was unable to describe this mystical ability, she had an innate intuition that allowed her to determine whether a mystical ability was constructive or destructive. Ning Yao turned around and asked in curiosity, "You're the person guiding Champion's cultivation?" The old man took several puffs from his smoking pipe before crossing his legs and gazing up at the dark sky and curtain of rain. He chuckled. "Cultivation. This can be regarded as cultivation. Why? Had another person with the right to find their own teaching and become an ancestor appeared in the outside world, and because of this, they've caused the cultivation world to decline year after year. It can't be, right? Those few mighty beings aren't running a charity. Since they've already decided to become tally one themselves, they have no choice but to continue down this path. They definitely won't allow others to take a slice of their cake." Ning Yao was baffled, and she asked, "Mr. Dao Yong, what are you talking about?" The old man faltered upon hearing this. "Your elders didn't tell you about the history of these old relics?" Ning Yao shook her head, answering, "My grandparents passed away early, and my parents don't like to talk about matters pertaining to the other worlds. They're afraid that I'll run away from home." Old man Yang turned around and carefully examined the young girl Dao in the end. He asked, "How many characters are inscribed on that wall now?" "Many heroic and powerful people appeared during my grandpa's generation, so 2 extra characters were inscribed on the wall in just a mere 100 years. There are a total of 18 characters now." Ning Yao replied honestly, "There are 18 characters already. Double quotes," the old man said with emotion. "Dao power, grand majestic, and wisdom land. Apart from these 6 characters, what are the others?" "Thunder pool restricted land, eternal lasting soul che, chen, and dong," Ning Yao replied solemnly. Old man Yang frowned and questioned, "Little girl, what about the final character? Did you eat it?" "I forgot it," Ning Yao huffed. The old man didn't persist, and he asked another question, saying, "Are the rules still the same? One will have the right to inscribe 1 character on the wall for every ascension tier demon that they slay." "Why do you know so much about my hometown?" Ning Yao asked with a frown. Old man Yang smiled and replied, "A swordsman came to our small town a long time ago, and he had a habit of recording his travel experiences. In the end, he died nearby. So I retrieved his state travel diary and flipped through it whenever I was bored." Ning Yao was skeptical of this explanation, as if he had eyes on the back of his head. The old man added, "It's up to you whether you believe this or not." Ning Yao observed Champion's condition, and she felt like he was in a state of deep meditation. "What's going on with him?" she asked. "Small death," Old man Yang replied slowly. Darius referred to sleep as a small death. Ning Yao felt slightly exasperated. Old man Yao's words were either vitriolic and grating on the ear, strange and hard to understand. The old man mused to himself, saying, "Little girl, let me ask you something. When a person says something in their mind, this is referred to as a voice in the mind. So, who does this voice belong to?" Ning Yao faltered upon hearing this, and she fell into deep thought. After a short while, she naturally shut her eyes and gathered her concentration. Afterward, she became extremely sleepy. In the end, her head surprisingly drooped down as she fell asleep. Old man Yang stood up, walking around Ning Yao and stopping in front of Chen Ping'an. He pointed at Ning Yao with his smoking pipe and said, "Look at her dog." With just a little guidance and a few words, she was able to immediately advance to the next tier. "Now, look at yourself. You have shit all abilities, yet you still like to act so stubbornly. What's the point of being so stubborn? Do you think the heavens will fall asleep and accidentally give you some fated opportunity?" Old man Yang returned to his seat and looked out at the increasingly heavy rain. The frantic raindrops pitter-pattered against the courtyard floor. His expression became slightly sad, and he murmured, "After so many years of picking and choosing between so many people, who would have thought that the least hopeful candidate would have the most resilient life?" An extremely skinny young boy carried a large basket of wild vegetables and held a string of 7 or 8 small fish in his hand as he walked through the alleys. After entering his courtyard, A rich young boy in silk clothes stepped on a stool and climbed onto the low courtyard wall. He squatted there with no care about dirtying his expensive clothes, and he chuckled. Wait, Chen Ping'an, you climbed the mountains and waded through the creek to find food again. Your ability to live off the mountains and waters is truly impressive. Dog, can you take me with you in the future? I'll reward you with some copper coins. The skinny boy smiled and replied, You don't need to give me money. The rich boy scowled and said, You can scram if you don't want it. Humph. I don't even want to go anymore. The young Chen Ping'an pulled the small fish off the reed string. The biggest fish was the size of his palm, while the smallest fish was only the size of his thumb. The young boy got up on his tippy toes and placed the fish on the windowsill to dry. They would be edible after drying, and there would be no need to add salt either. Not only that, but there was also no need to slice open the bellies and remove their intestines. This wasn't because he was afraid of the hassle. Instead, it was because not much meat would be left if he did this in any case. He found the fish to be crunchy and tasty. The rich boy Xianxia felt a little regretful after saying those words. In reality, he had always envied his neighbor, who was the same age as him. He would always return home with something in his hands, whether that be wild rabbits, catfish, wild berries, or what have you. He was tempted whenever he saw this, and this was an absolute feast for his eyes. However, the stubborn young boy wasn't willing to apologize. After seeing Chen Ping'an's adept and carefree movements, he more so felt a slight sense of stifling unhappiness. This Chen Ping'an was so poor that he could barely afford to cook, and he was also sleeping in a rundown room that leaked wine from all the different directions. In fact, he couldn't even afford a single stick of candied hawthorn. That being the case, what in the world was he so happy about? Squatting on the wall, the rich young boy was very baffled. One day, the rich young boy who could only live in clay recently and didn't need to worry about food and clothes came back home with his face black and blue. His clothes were also covered in mud. Zigui had just become his maidservant, and she asked him what had happened. However, Xianxia refused to tell her no matter what. After going back to his room, he shut the door and lay down in bed. He had argued with someone today, and he had even fought with them. Even now, some of their venomous words were still ringing in his ears, causing the proud young boy to feel a piercing pain in his heart. His expression shifted between grief and anger. You just have some shitty money, is all . What are you so smug about? You can't even compare to Chen Ping'an. Even though his parents are dead, at least he knows who his parents are. Do you know who your parents are? He couldn't get these words out of his mind. Xianxia tossed and turned in his bed, yet he couldn't fall asleep no matter what. The next day, the rich young boy didn't squat on the courtyard wall and chat with his neighbor like normal. Instead, he surprisingly paid a visit to Chen Ping'an's house. He said something to Chen Ping'an, and after a few days, Chen Ping'an left the small town and broke his promise to his deceased mother. He was still very young, but he had already gone to the Dragon Kill to become an apprentice. There was a figure sneaking around the back door of the pharmacy, and after catching a glimpse of them, Old Man Yang didn't say anything. He simply turned around, not wanting to dirty his eyes. The sneaking figure felt especially hurt after seeing the old man's response. What hurt him even more was the fact that the woman who he should have referred to as sister-in-law furiously pushed his head aside with one hand, holding an umbrella with her other hand. She strode toward the building in the backyard. After seeing the old man, she immediately prepared to shout at him. Old Man Yang sighed, and he hurriedly walked out of the building and shut the door behind him. He stood on the steps and looked at the woman who was about to raise hell. At this moment, he even lost interest in his smoking pipe. The woman stopped and placed her hands on her hips, scolding. What are you doing? Ha! Trying to stop a thief. At the end of the day, you're still my man's master. So why are you always doing such wicked things? Leah was doing just fine as a shop assistant, so what right do you have to fire him and tell him to piss off? Is the young family's medicine shop yours? Huh? Did Leah sleep with his master's wife? Or did he sleep with his master's darling daughter? The man who was pushed back over by the crowd shrunk down and hid behind the door. He truly wanted to dig a hole and bury himself at this moment. Just what kind of temper did his master have? Just what kind of temper did Leah's wife have? How could he not know this? Thus, he felt like he would lose a layer of skin. Even if he wasn't killed, old man Yang was emotionless as he said, "Are you done? If you're done, then you can go home and moan in bed. I've heard that the meowing in the westernmost area of the small town doesn't stop all year round. There's meowing in the morning, and there's meowing at night. In fact, there's so much meowing that many people were forced to move. His words seemingly struck a pain point, and the woman's voice rose several decibels as she shouted, "Old geezer, you still have the face to tell me to go home after losing his job and income. Your disciple only knows how to wander around the streets all day long. The roof on that home collapsed 2 days ago, and he can't even scrape together enough money to patch it back up. I was forced to return to my clan's residence with my children, and I suffered all kinds of harassment and abuse. If Leah weren't kicked out of the pharmacy by you, would our family of 4 have suffered so much grief? Old man Yang, hurry up and hand over your savings for your coffin and help us fix our home. Otherwise, there's going to be no end to this." The old man wore a cold expression as he looked at the hiding man, Zhang Dafeng. There was grief on Zhang Dafeng's face as he said, "Master, Leah has gone to deal with that matter according to your instructions. He definitely won't be coming back anytime soon." Old man Yang's expression became dark. At this moment, Zhang Dafeng felt the urge to fall to his knees and count on. The woman threw her umbrella to the ground and sat down on the rain-soaked floor, bursting into tears and crying, "Undying old geezer, have you taken a liking to cheating with your disciples' wives? Are you even going to tug on me?" Old man Yang carried a stool over from under the eaves, and he slowly sat down before retrieving some loose tobacco from his pocket and squishing it into a bowl. He then placed it into his smoking pipe and started to puff away. He gazed up at the sky and completely ignored the shouting woman. Zhang Dafeng looked at the woman who was crying and shouting in the backyard. The rain was quite heavy, and the woman was also fairly voluptuous, with her clothing also being relatively thin at this moment. As a result, many shop assistants from the Yang family's medicine shop walked over to join the fun. They were all secretly delighted as they enjoyed this feast for the eyes. The woman was crying hysterically, yet she suddenly fell silent at some moment, as if someone had grabbed her neck. She rubbed her eyes and hurriedly stood up, not forgetting to pick up her oil paper umbrella as she frantically ran away. As she ran, she screamed, "There's a ghost!" Old man Yang grimaced, saying, "Like red droppings on an incense table. This is someone detested by both gods and ghosts alike."